Have you ever heard of the Hyksos? These mysterious conquerors ruled over Egypt for centuries, but their story is often overlooked. Who were these astonishing people, and how did they manage to overtake one of the greatest civilizations in history? This video explores their rise, their rule, and their lasting legacy in the ancient world. The Hyksos were not a single ethnic group, but rather a coalition of people from various regions in the Levant and Asia Minor, including areas corresponding to modern-day Syria, Palestine, and Mesopotamia. Some sources suggest they were likely Semitic-speaking peoples, though their exact ethnicity is debated among scholars. They gained control over Egypt during the Second Intermediate Period, circa 1650 to 1550 BCE, a time when Egypt was politically fragmented and vulnerable. Their name, derived from the Egyptian term Heka, meaning rulers of foreign lands, refers to their origins outside of Egypt, specifically from the Near East. Their society was likely a mix of Canaanites, Syrians, and other peoples from the eastern Mediterranean, with a distinct cultural identity from the Egyptians. The Hyksos established a dynasty in the Nile Delta, and their rule marked a significant foreign presence in Egypt. While they were not native Egyptians, they adapted many Egyptian customs, and their rule had a lasting impact on the civilization. Why did they come to Egypt? The Hyksos did not invade Egypt with the sole purpose of conquering, but rather took advantage of specific circumstances that allowed them to settle in and eventually dominate Egypt. Several factors contributed to their arrival. 1. Political instability in Egypt. During the Second Intermediate Period, Egypt was divided and fragmented. The country was in a weakened state due to internal strife and the decline of the Middle Kingdom. The Theban rulers of the south and the Heracleopolitan kings of the north were in conflict, and Egypt was not united under a single strong ruler. This created an opening for external groups like the Hyksos to take control of the fragmented northern part of the country. 2. Migration and settling in the Nile Delta. The Hyksos likely came to Egypt gradually as part of a broader pattern of migration that occurred in the ancient world. They moved into the eastern Nile Delta, where they established strongholds, including the city of Avaris, modern-day Tel el-Daba. Over time, they began to assimilate into Egyptian life, taking advantage of Egypt's fertile land and strategic location. Third, economic opportunity. Egypt, with its wealth from agriculture, trade, and strategic position at the crossroads of Africa and Asia, presented significant economic opportunities. The Hyksos likely sought to capitalize on Egypt's resources, including its agricultural surplus, and to control trade routes between the Mediterranean and Africa. Fourth, military superiority. The Hyksos brought advanced military technology and tactics, including the horse-drawn chariot and composite bows, which gave them a significant advantage in battle. This allowed them to conquer Egypt's northern territories and eventually extend their influence over the entire region. The Egyptians, who were unaccustomed to such innovations, were unable to effectively resist their advance. How did they rise to power? Initially, the Hyksos established themselves as local rulers in the Nile Delta, gaining power through military prowess and strategic alliances with local Egyptian rulers. Over time, they expanded their influence and eventually controlled large parts of Egypt, establishing the 15th dynasty of Egypt. They ruled Egypt for over a century, from around 1650 BCE to 1550 BCE, with Avaris as their capital. While their presence in Egypt marked a foreign domination, the Hyksos did not completely replace Egyptian culture or religion. They adopted many aspects of Egyptian life, including Egyptian gods and royal titles, and even incorporated elements of Egyptian architecture into their cities. Despite their foreign roots, the Hyksos blended elements of their own culture with Egyptian traditions, leaving a lasting impact on Egypt's military, religious, and cultural practices. How did they conquer Egypt? The Hyksos were formidable military strategists whose rise to power in Egypt was largely due to their superior military technology and tactics. Originating from the Near East, the Hyksos brought with them several innovations that revolutionized warfare in Egypt. 1. Horse-drawn chariots. One of the most significant advantages the Hyksos possessed was the use of horse-drawn chariots. While chariots were not unknown in Egypt, the Hyksos chariots were faster, more maneuverable, and used for both transport and battle. Their speed and power allowed them to strike quickly and decisively during skirmishes, which gave them a military edge over the Egyptian forces, who relied mostly on infantry and traditional weaponry. 2. Composite bows. The Hyksos also introduced composite bows, which were much more powerful than the simple bows used by the Egyptians at the time. These bows could shoot arrows with greater force and accuracy, and the Hyksos used them to devastating effect in battles, particularly during the siege of Avaris, where their archers were able to overpower Egyptian defenders. 3. Advanced tactics. The Hyksos also had advanced battle tactics. They often combined the use of chariots, archers, and infantry in ways that the Egyptians had not yet mastered. Their ability to coordinate various military units gave them a flexibility that overwhelmed the Egyptian forces, particularly in the fragmented political climate of Egypt during the Second Intermediate Period. When the Hyksos first invaded Egypt, they took advantage of Egypt's internal divisions. Egypt was divided into several smaller competing kingdoms, and the central authority had weakened. The Hyksos were able to exploit this weakness, first establishing a foothold in the Nile Delta and eventually capturing key cities, including the important city of Avaris. Their military superiority allowed them to conquer large parts of Egypt by the mid-17th century BCE. Their most significant victory came when they captured Avaris, which became their capital, and later when they defeated the Theban rulers in Upper Egypt. Despite initial resistance, the Hyksos continued their conquest, eventually ruling over Egypt for around a century. What was Hyksos spirituality and daily life like? The Hyksos were deeply spiritual people, with their beliefs rooted in their homelands but adapted to Egyptian traditions. While they worshipped gods like Baal and Asherah, they also adopted Egyptian deities. Their daily life was a fusion of Eastern and Egyptian customs, from food to architecture and art. Family life was central to Hyksos society. Their community structure was complex, mixing their own hierarchy with Egyptian systems of governance. The relationship between the Hyksos and the native Egyptians was complex. While the Hyksos initially ruled over Egypt as conquerors, they eventually assimilated into Egyptian society in various ways. One significant example of this integration was intermarriage. First, dynastic intermarriage. The Hyksos rulers often intermarried with local Egyptian elites and even pharaohs. For instance, the Hyksos king, Apophis, is believed to have married Egyptian princesses or daughters of Egyptian nobility. This helped to cement their rule and legitimacy as foreign rulers. The intermarriage between Hyksos and Egyptians also served to merge aspects of Egyptian and Hyksos cultures, particularly in terms of governance, religion, and social practices. 2. Cultural assimilation. Over time, the Hyksos kings adopted Egyptian customs, religious practices, and even Egyptian titles. This intermingling created a fusion of cultures that, while maintaining Hyksos influences, also embraced Egyptian ways of life. They even adopted the Egyptian gods and incorporated Egyptian iconography in their own reign. How did they contribute to Egyptian culture? While the Hyksos ruled Egypt as foreign invaders, their presence had a lasting impact on Egyptian culture, which blended their traditions with those of the native Egyptians. Here are several ways in which the Hyksos contributed to Egypt's cultural development. First, military innovations. As mentioned earlier, the Hyksos introduced important military innovations to Egypt, including the horse-drawn chariot and composite bows. These weapons and techniques were eventually adopted by the Egyptians and played a crucial role in the formation of Egypt's powerful military during the New Kingdom period. Second, technological influence. The Hyksos also brought new technologies with them. They introduced improved pottery-making techniques, weapons, and advanced agricultural tools that influenced Egyptian craftsmanship and industry. The Egyptians adopted these techniques and improved upon them, which helped drive Egypt's growth in subsequent centuries. Third, architectural styles. The Hyksos brought with them elements of Near Eastern architecture and design, which influenced Egyptian building techniques, particularly in fortifications and military structures. They constructed strongholds and cities using different architectural methods that were later incorporated into Egyptian constructions. 4. Cultural exchange. The Hyksos introduced new art styles and cultural practices, such as different clothing materials, decorative styles, and even the concept of the foreign ruler. This brought about a greater degree of cultural exchange between Egypt and the Levant, which would later influence Egyptian art and religious practices. The Hyksos in battle. The Hyksos rule was not without conflict. Their time in Egypt was marked by several key battles, including the eventual rebellion of native Egyptian dynasties. The Egyptian New Kingdom under Pharaoh Ahmose the first finally defeated the Hyksos after a long struggle. But their impact wasn't erased. They left behind lasting military and cultural changes. What was their role in Egypt's evolution? The Hyksos' role in Egypt's evolution cannot be overstated. Although their rule was eventually overthrown by the native Egyptians, their time in power had lasting effects on Egyptian culture, military practices, and governance. First, transformation of the Egyptian military. The military innovations introduced by the Hyksos, such as the chariot and composite bow, had a profound impact on Egypt's later success in battle. These technologies were crucial in helping Egypt become a dominant power in the ancient world during the New Kingdom period. In fact, after the Hyksos were expelled, the Egyptians perfected the use of these technologies and became one of the most formidable military forces of their time. 2. Political and administrative changes. The Hyksos influenced Egyptian governance, particularly in terms of the relationship between rulers and the ruled. Their ability to govern and administer in Egypt led to the establishment of a more centralized and efficient system of governance, which the Egyptians would later adopt and refine. 3. Cultural integration. The Hyksos played a key role in integrating foreign elements into Egyptian society. This cultural exchange helped to create a more cosmopolitan Egypt. In the years following their expulsion, Egypt's culture became enriched by their interaction with the outside world, particularly the Near East. This influence contributed to the flourishing of Egyptian society during the New Kingdom, when Egypt became a superpower in the ancient world. Where are the Hyksos today? While the Hyksos were eventually driven out of Egypt, their descendants likely assimilated into Egyptian society. The legacies of their rule can still be seen in modern Egypt, where their innovations in warfare and governance played a pivotal role in shaping Egypt's future. The Hyksos were not just invaders. They were a civilization that left a major mark on Egypt and the world. From their military prowess to their contributions to Egyptian culture, their reign was a pivotal moment in ancient history. The next time you think of Egypt, remember that the Hyksos, with their astonishing achievements, played a crucial part in its evolution. Their story is a testament to the power of cultural exchange, resilience, and transformation. Subscribe if you are interested in ancient civilizations and history.